Demonized and suppressed by the war on drugs, psychedelic medicines are making their return, and we're here to bring you the latest in scientific research and therapeutic practices involving psychedelic medicines from psilocybin to ayahuasca to DMT and beyond. This is the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Lynn Marie Morsky, your guide on this journey, and today's episode is about when not to proceed with a planned psychedelic journey with Dr. Rick Barnett. Dr. Barnett is a licensed clinical psychologist and licensed alcohol and drug counselor trained in psychedelic therapies and research in 2020 by the California Institute for Integral Studies. Rick is the co-founder of the Psychedelic Society of Vermont, which is a growing community of healthcare practitioners from Vermont and New England interested in psychedelic therapies and research. In addition to running a traditional psychotherapy group practice, Rick consults with patients curious about psychedelic research and therapies, including helping people understand the processes of preparing for, experiencing, and integrating the intentional use of psychedelics for personal growth and healing. Dr. Barnett has also recently begun providing low-dose ketamine-assisted psychotherapy to select patients. Now, I have been wanting to discuss this topic forever. Think about it, how often we plan something so far in advance. I mean, if you're going to do a psychedelic journey that requires that you leave the country, you've probably planned this a number of weeks or maybe even months in advance, and then the time comes and there's something affecting your readiness. What do you do, and how do you know if it's something that should stop you from doing the journey or maybe suggest that you postpone the journey, or if it's something that is less likely to affect it and maybe you should go ahead with the journey regardless of what's going on? And those are really difficult questions to answer, and there may be some factors that weigh into that you might not have thought of before. And so I'm really excited for you to listen to Dr. Barnett and I have this conversation. Now, this is the time where I usually say, hey, if you're a practitioner and you want to learn more about psychedelics, go join the Psychedelic Medicine Association. Well, this week, if you are a practitioner and you want to learn more about psychedelics, I have another option for you. Our friends at Psychedelics Today have recently launched a holistic, immersive 12-month certificate program called VITAL, which helps professionals master the elements of psychedelic-informed therapy and integration. Taught by over 35 industry pioneers, VITAL bridges academic, clinical, philosophical, and reflective approaches to healing. VITAL features experiential retreats and offers flexible payment plans with a remote learning structure to accommodate a global student population. VITAL also features yours truly as one of the guest presenters. Applications are open until March 27, and then this is 2022, and classes begin April 19th, 2022. Visit vitalpsychedelictraining.com for more information or to apply. And let me repeat that URL, vitalpsychedelictraining.com. All right, now without further ado. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dr. Barnett. By the way, would you prefer Dr. Barnett or Rick? I forgot to ask you pre-air.
Well, what I always say is whatever makes other people feel comfortable, I'm fine with Rick.
Okay. Excelente. All right, Rick, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited for this topic that we're going to talk about. The way that this episode came about is that Rick had put he put some thoughts down in a little like a LinkedIn article format and shared it on LinkedIn. And it was something I'd want to discuss forever. And I thought, oh, fantastic. I've been following Rick for a long time, was always looking for a reason to have him on the podcast. And this just kind of like hand delivered a great excuse for us to chat and somebody really knowledgeable that can come to you and provide some insight into the times when you may or may not, I hope you can't hear this like trash truck in the background, such timing, that you may or may not be wishing to do a psychedelic journey. So in this article that Rick wrote, and I'm just going to read the intro paragraph because I think it's brilliant, because it really sets the stage for the discussion we're going to have. He says, the date has been set for a while. The research has been done. The preparation is complete. The meditation practice is in place. Important intimate and social relations are in full support. A trusting relationship with a guide or therapist has been established. The desperation, curiosity, or eagerness that motivated the pursuit of a planned psychedelic journey has continued to intensify. And then something happens. Something doesn't feel right. When do we make a decision not to move forward? And can it wait? So, Rick, let's get into this discussion. First, if you could tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write this article, and then let's get into some of the situations that may arise that when people are in that time preparing for a journey and then start to have these second thoughts.
Well, from my training and my experience in the psychedelic world, I have found that through the preparation process, when you speak to a guide, when you speak to a coach, when you speak to a researcher, my hope is and my experience has been that it is always an option on the table at the last minute if you don't feel quite right, that you have permission to opt out. Now, I don't think everybody does this. I've read something recently online, some review of a psychedelic experience where that option actually was not given to somebody, which in my opinion is horrifying. However, I think that good skilled clinicians, good skilled trained facilitators, guides, always give so much freedom and power to the person that they're working with. And it came about for me because I believe that having that option is so important. To be able to know that at the last minute, at the last day, days leading up to it, if something is going on and then the day of something doesn't feel quite right, you can even go into the journey, go meet with your coach, the person who's going to facilitate, the therapist, and say, I need to talk about this. Something isn't quite right. I'm not sure if today is the day. A skilled guide, a skilled practitioner will spend whatever time is needed to sort out what's going on. And if it's really, it could be a sound decision to, like, let's put this off for a little while, let's hold off, this is really important. And really knowing where that nuance is and how to elicit all the information that's required to really dive deep and figure out what's going on. It could go either way. You could have the discussion at the last minute, and you know what? I think actually I feel like after having processed it for the last 30 minutes or 45 minutes for an hour, I'm feeling better. Let's go for it. I'm okay with that. Or yeah, together you decide, nope, it's not going to happen. So in the article, I just listed out a number of possibilities. It was really just a few off the top of my head. I think on my social media post, I was like, what do other people think? What are some things that I might have missed that, continue the discussion? There are so many variables that could come into play. And so that's why I wrote the article. And that's been my experience in both my personal experience and, working with other people in my training in psychedelic therapy and research.
I think you bring up such a great point at the beginning of what you're talking about was the fact that this should always be an option. This is for better, for worse, if we want to look at it in different, paradigms, this is a therapeutic mechanism. This is a treatment, right? Nobody's forcing you in most areas of other medicine. Oh no, you have to take this therapy, so why would you be forced to take this type of therapy just because you signed up for it? That seems to be way more weighing into either the ego or the wallet of the person who is facilitating. And I think that's where it's really important. If you check out an episode I did maybe 6 something months ago about how to choose a facilitator in a retreat center, I don't know that we discussed it then, but ask what their refund policy is, because I have looked at places and they have some have full refunds. Amazing. That's how I think it should be, because there shouldn't be something else. Your finances shouldn't be weighing into your decision. If everything else is a no, I don't feel this is the right time, but then you're worried about losing your money. That could be a huge motivator for you to go ahead and do something that could cause actual damage. And so look
Mhm.
at their refund policy and talk with them ahead of time if the refund policy isn't clear, because I have seen places that outline really strict like lack of refunds, and to me that's absolutely the wrong way to go about it. Yes, I realize people have to keep the lights on, but it's not every day that somebody's going to cancel to where I think this is going to put somebody under if they have a refund policy that's in alignment with what's healthiest for the patient. So that's something to keep in mind going even before you've scheduled your journey, is what's the policy on that, because that should never be a consideration. So with that said, let's get into the list of things. I think first on the list was physical ailments.
Mhm. Yeah, physical ailments. The reason why I chose that, as a basic structure for the article, I appreciate the biopsychosocial approach. We have all heard about the biopsychosocial approach. The term was coined in 1977. I think it was Dr. George Engel or something. And the name of my private practice is BPS Health. So framing things in a biopsychosocial way is really helpful. And then, of course, Lynn Marie, the that can be extended to biopsychosocial, emotional, spiritual. So you can sort of broaden it out even further. So the physical aspect of what could come up the days before. Largely that was motivated because of COVID. So I happen to know somebody who had a planned ayahuasca journey, and someone in the group that was supposed to be part of the planned ayahuasca journey back a few months ago got COVID, and the whole this had been preparation for months, and frankly, in my own psychedelic training, we were supposed to be scheduled to go to a breathwork workshop with the Mithoffers as part of my training, and because of COVID, that was canceled twice. So a lot of preparation went into it. So that's just the most obvious, but let's think of less obvious things, right? Let's say you have a really bad stomach bug. Let's say maybe a physical illness in a family member that's really upsetting, and you need to attend to their physical illness. Going into a psychedelic journey when your father just had a stroke, probably not the best time. You might still be able to proceed with it depending on the discussion and how you're processing it. But so physical illness is not just for the individual or physical phenomena. I don't know, what if you were mountain biking the day before and sprained your ankle, or you think you damaged your knee somehow and you're sort of limping into your psychedelic. Again, these aren't deal breakers necessarily, but anything physical that is off kilter. Now, we recognize that psychedelic medicine treatments are increasingly transdiagnostic, right? I mean, we're looking at physical ailments, chronic pain conditions, which is an awesome topic. And I know you've had guests on talk about that. All kinds of physical illnesses. So a physical illness or physical problem obviously is not a rule out for proceeding with a planned psychedelic journey. But I was more referring to something that seemed new and sudden and off kilter physically, that you just may want to take a step back and consider, is now the right time.
Yeah, because I'm putting myself in the place of somebody who's all of a sudden struck with something, especially if it's something that could cause anxiety. Um, like all of a sudden you have a new mystery joint that's swollen. What could this be? I mean, maybe I'm a little hypochondriac and just showing my stripes here, but if I'm going to go into a journey where it's going to be me with my thoughts for 8 hours, and right now all I can think about is, oh my gosh, do I have rheumatoid arthritis new onset or something like that? Like, it also depends on your relationship with your own physical illnesses, right? If you have a swollen joint and that happens every other day and you don't think about it, whatever, maybe it's fine. But if it's something that's really going to be weighing heavily on your mind and maybe occupying the brain space that would otherwise be used toward maybe addressing past trauma or limiting beliefs or something like that, I can see where that would be one area where one reason why you might want to avoid. And then also, just if you're in physical discomfort during the journey, it may be hard to really relax and let the medicine take hold. One thing I wanted to ask you about: in my own life, I was preparing for a journey, and the day before, it got the worst stomach pain, and I called the facilitators and I said, I'm having such stomach pain tonight. And it wasn't like, should I do it or should I not do it? I just felt comfortable enough to tell them. And they said, we think this is kind of, how the GI system likes to, there's that or the brain in the gut, and it likes to react when you have certain emotions. It said, you probably have some emotions that are starting to come up in preparation for the ceremony tomorrow, and that may be leading to a little bit of nausea. And so they kind of talked me through it. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how to maybe suss out, and I know this is going to be person by person, but how people can evaluate, is this physical pain I'm in maybe just a reaction to emotions that are starting to surface, or is this something that they will surface tomorrow and this is all happening as part of the process, or this is something that maybe I should consider rescheduling for?
Yeah, I think in the article I was really referring to some more obvious acute physical situation. Now, sussing out the nuance between an actual stomach bug that you might have had versus the emotional experience leading into a planned journey is really important to sort out. And you know, as a physician that sometimes it's not so easy. You know, if someone comes into the ER with heart palpitations, oftentimes they go through the rigmarole of an echocardiogram, all kinds of different things, when really it's just a panic attack. And you know, it's very difficult sometimes to sort that out. However, what you're pointing out is, and we keep going back to, really being comfortable having that conversation with whoever you might want to have that conversation with. You could have the conversation with a loved one who's really supportive of you having this journey and say, honey, I don't really know what's going on with me. You know me pretty well. Do you think this is like a new thing? And then also, obviously, your facilitator, your guide, your therapist, to be able to say, this is something that's going on. And so I'm actually curious in your case, um, and also how severe it is. But you know, if someone's stomach upset is so severe, obviously it's just, so you want to measure, you know, try to get a sense of how severe it is. That's really important. And then, and you know, there's a lot of people that have psychosomatic issues. Is that part of their, you know, hopefully through good preparation, your therapist or your guide has, you know, done a thorough understanding of who you are as a whole person, and should be able to provide some insight based on the stuff that we've talked about during preparation. You've always seemed to be someone who's really health conscious, maybe a little bit overly sensitive to any little, you know, thing. Do you remember that time we talked during preparation about, you know, when this happened physically? And you know, so the therapist or the guide, or a family member, someone who knows the individual, could really help sort that out, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable point. Talking it out with a number of people, or any options of people that can maybe help you suss out, even, and very important, like you said, if you have a history of psychosomatic things, or you, like Ava mentioned, if you know you're a little bit of a hypochondriac, and you pay lots of attention to symptoms and it worries you more, then maybe, yeah, this is something coming up because of preparation for the ceremony, and something to just to pay attention to and work through. Oh, I had a thought here, and this is something we talked about in episode 2 or 3 episodes ago with Ali Fiducia, is women's health issues. You know, women's health varies so widely the entire month. And some women have really difficult times, you know, in the premenstrual or maybe in the menstrual region of their cycle. uh, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I know it, you know, it may be hard for women to schedule months out if they've prepared a journey. You know, you don't know what your cycle is exactly going to be, but have you had to face those kinds of issues perhaps with patients, and have any thoughts on what happens when that kind of issue arises? Maybe it's menstrual cycle related.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in that area, so I don't want to speak out of school, but at least having experience with patients, female patients in this specific area, I I know, like, you know, one thing that comes up, it may be molecule specific. So we actually haven't talked about that, and you know, as we're talking today, but you know, ketamine when it comes to physical illnesses might be a different, you know, judgment call, because ketamine, dissociative anesthetic, you kind of lose sense of your body. You know, if there's something going on physically, that might be okay to go ahead with ketamine, because you're just kind of you're not with your body as much. But psilocybin or high dose other like classic psychedelic and a physical illness, that could be, or physical pain, that could be different. But for women, so I was thinking ayahuasca, for example. So if you plan an ayahuasca journey months in advance, usually you're going to follow some sort of maybe not strict, but you know, there's something called the dieta, obviously, and so people follow a certain diet leading up to it, maybe in the month or so leading up to it. So I believe, you know, a female in that situation is going to be paying a lot of attention to her menstrual cycle, a lot of attention to what she's eating. So she's going to be more acutely tuned into that particular aspect of it. And I think, again, so molecule specific, you know, how does that work for, I don't really think, like, for psilocybin journeys, all the training that I've done, you don't hear a lot about like a dieta. You know, you want to be careful about the, you know, too much red meat or something the night before the journey, too much dairy, too, you know, maybe go plant based a little bit, but you know, it's not usually that strict. So that's that's just one comment. I'm not totally that's not totally my wheelhouse, but I do believe that I think that, you know, knowing your body, paying attention to that cycle for a woman, especially, I think it's just heightened when you're aware of your body more when you're planning to go into these. these journeys. And so have you had experiences? I'm curious. I want to listen to that episode now. What you and Allie talked about.
Well, because there isn't a lot of data on this. Oh, excuse me. There isn't. I don't know that there's any data on this, but a question that I keep bringing up is there an ideal time in a woman's cycle to be doing journeys? Because the first half of our cycle versus the second, our physiology is very different. And, we're able to exercise longer, do all these things. Our first cycle, things are very stable. And the second half, things are much less stable, and emotions get heightened and all those things. So is it better to do a psychedelic journey when your emotions are already heightened, or is it better to do it in this more stable state? Is it more likely to have a challenging journey in one state versus the other? And we know that there are ayahuasca traditions that have forbidden women to sit in ayahuasca circles if they're on their period. And so, like, to me, that says that there's some kind of ancestral wisdom weighing in there in some way. And so, that's an area of research that I'm just dying to hear more about when it happens someday. But I like to bring it up all the time so that the women out there, half of the listeners, realize, oh, this is something to be considering. Like, if I'm going to schedule a ketamine journey, which is much easier to schedule than an ayahuasca journey, like, maybe let's, if I can time it in that first half of my cycle when I think things will probably be a little bit calmer in my physiology, maybe that's the time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good way to wrap up, I think, the first topic that you brought up in your article, and the second was interpersonal conflict. Can you go a little bit about how that might affect your decision?
Yeah, the interpersonal conflict is really so what it says in the article, like a nasty argument with a loved one, a stressful cycle with a friend or coworker. Sometimes we're in maybe unhealthy cycles with certain people in our lives, and or one that happens to flare up right before a psychedelic journey. Now, on the one hand, that's not, again, it's not a deal breaker because maybe it's coming up for a reason right at that time, and having a psychedelic experience around that time can help, shed some light, provide some insight, do some shadow work around what is involved in that interpersonal conflict. Because I'm a believer that we are the primary contributors to the interpersonal conflict in our lives, even though people obviously all have their own responsibility. So I think if it's to the point where really it's just a particularly nasty, that's why I use the word nasty. It's a particularly difficult thing, one that really has historically bogged you down, and and right around the time of a journey, it's really reaching a climax, and you're just really in a shitty headspace. Maybe, for example, you've been wondering about your marriage, and there's been discussions around divorce or separation, and you get into a cycle where it's just really a really difficult thing, and you just had an argument with your spouse that was really a doozy. It was a real doozy, not just your normal, like, oh, this is so frustrating, but a really one that's really, rocked you. Doesn't have to be a physically violent one or a verbally violent one, but it could be just a really powerfully upsetting one for whatever reason. And I think that all of these things that I listed out, I'm really trying to highlight, these are domains of people's lives that at various times in our lives can flare up to a point that's beyond what we're normally able to just handle. We can all handle a lot of shit in our lives. We can handle a lot. We've just been through this collective pandemic trauma. We're all resilient, we're anti-fragile, we have the capacity to adapt to stress. What I'm trying to point out is that these larger flare-ups right around this crucial time, because the psychedelic journey is so sacred, you really need to take a step back and be like, is this something that I can just weather like I usually do and go into the psychedelic journey, or is this something that's decidedly different or way heavier than I'm used to, and I just don't feel like tomorrow is the day to eat 5 grams of mushrooms and blast off, because I think I'm just going to be shaken too much. And that could, we're always talking about ways to optimize these psychedelic journeys, and this is just another way to optimize it by actually putting it off.
Yeah, that's a really important point to make. Is that timing is another factor in the preparation and integration, right? Like, you can do all the preparing, and if you still choose the wrong time, then you haven't prepared properly. And it seems like kind of that's the final thing, is like, is tomorrow the right day? Is, you wake up that morning, is today the right day? This is my last piece of preparation. Are we fully, ready and prepared. And from your vantage point as a psychotherapist and who does administer, like you said, low dose ketamine, I always kind of vision, and this is maybe a little more on the woo side, but going into these with more of just like a neutral energy. Like I've done the work, like you said, the meditation practices in place, all those things. There might be a little bit of excitement, or I might be having a fine day, but I think that going in with kind of a neutral energy, as opposed to what you were just talking about. Like if you've just had a really heavy argument, that just seems like a lot of heavy kind of negative energy that may be going in. Does that do you tend to see that play out in we're not necessarily trying to avoid challenging journeys if that's what needs to happen, but it seems like there's a needlessly challenging journey that may be avoided, or could we make the journey more therapeutically beneficial if we go in with a certain type of energy? So is that something that you've seen play out in your practice?
Well, I love that idea of having a neutral perspective or a neutral energy going into it, both for the therapist and the journeyer or the guide and the person going on the journey, because well, it brings up another issue. I don't mean to get off track, but it's really setting expectations correctly. People are either super desperate and thinking it's just a miracle cure, or they just nothing's going to work anyway, no matter what you do. And there are some people who take high doses of whatever, whether it's pharmacologically or psychologically, like it does not impact them. Is that a nocebo effect? Like the opposite of like I believe it's not going to work for me. So having neutral expectations is so important for both people in the room. But yes, I think it does play out. I think that at least with ketamine, my experience has been, the 24 hours, the hours leading up to, sitting with the medicine. I don't know if you use that expression with ketamine, sitting with the medicine, sitting with ketamine, sitting in session with people, the stuff that you were reading, the people you were talking to, the dreams you had the night before, all is stuff that could very much and does sometimes come up during the session. So if it's a nasty argument or some difficult, heavy thing, if you don't, if you could do that as part of the, game day decision, you walk into your therapist's office or the guide setting that you're doing the ceremony or the treatment with, and you're able to sort of set that down. Can we set that down for the next couple of hours? We can return to it and process it at a later date, but can we adopt or sort of bring ourselves into that neutral energy state? And I think it's possible. I actually think it's good practice to, always check in with people. How are you? I mean, that's obviously the premise of this article. It's like, how are you doing? What's been going on the last 24 hours leading up to this? How have your relationships been? How'd you sleep last night? Asking those questions. If you don't, maybe they'll just be like, I don't want to sabotage this. I don't want them to think that I can't handle this today. So I'm just gonna like minimize it, or whatever. Just making sure that people know everything's okay to talk about. If you have a good guide, a good therapist, there's no right or wrong door. There's no right or wrong answer. Everything is happening for a reason. It's we're being guided together in this process. So don't don't sugarcoat anything. Don't inhibit yourself in any way. So yeah, I like that. I like that idea of neutral energy.
Well, thanks. I don't know that that's a Morsky original, but I was trying to find a term that wasn't heavy energy, right? Coming in because I've been in situations where like we plan to do a thing and then some big thing comes on top of you, and I think a lot of actually the things that are in the list that are coming up are different forms of kind of heavy negative energy. And the next one that was on the list is like an emotional unrest within the person, so not necessarily an interpersonal conflict, but something that just comes up within yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some people with depression or anxiety, or, because that's what, people come in for treatment for these common conditions that a lot of people struggle with. It's obviously in a more clinically severe way. But I think, when you're sitting there scratching your head saying, I don't know why I'm depressed. I don't know why I'm so anxious. I've done all the preparation. I've done everything that I've got to do, but I'm just still so anxious, or I feel so depressed. Something is just so off. And, it's that internal thing that you can't really identify anything in the outside world, physically, interpersonally, but something I think the next one or somewhere in the article is talking about a surge of fear. So that would be sort of that's the next one. You know, I think that I was trying to distinguish that as a unique phenomena, but that's more like the exaggerated piece of just something's emotionally off or emotional unrest. And so I think people with depression and anxiety know exactly what I'm talking about. There's like the normal everyday anxiety or depression that totally sucks and that they're in treatment for and that they've tried to work with. And then there's times where it's just intensified. It's different somehow. And again, the question is always nuance. The reason why we're doing this interview is like, well, isn't that normal? It might my anxiety be a little bit heightened because of what I'm about to do? Might I be a little bit more depressed because, maybe my depression is scared it's gonna lose, it's gonna go away and it's trying to hang on a little bit longer before the psychedelic comes in and, makes me feel better. Depression has its own kind of, energy around it, and it may not want part of you may not want it to leave. And so it's just this. So isn't that normal? The question again is always, can we talk about this and sort through it? And I'm just going to be repeating myself. If it's so acute and so, out of the ordinary in that sort of window of time, it's definitely worth taking a step back and sorting that out. And that one in particular may not be one that's as easily sorted out with a loved one, and frankly maybe not even with a guide. That's such an internal intrapsychic internal emotional thing that maybe nobody can really understand. So it might be that if you have a meditation practice or a religious practice, or you contact God or a higher power, or maybe sort it out internally if you can, rather than looking to other people to help you sort that. That's a unique one. It's an inside job on that one.
I like that. An inside job. And since you brought it up and kind of weaved it in, surge of fear, is that were you basically talking like unknown surge of fear, or were you referring to that like I now have an overwhelming anxiety about, especially if it's your first time sitting with a certain medicine?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it says in the article for those who are listening, apart from a steady background uneasiness that might slowly increase leading up to the date of the psychedelic journey, I think having increasing fear is normal. It's okay. You're about to embark on this experience. A lot of people are nervous and fearful, but it's possible to experience a surge of fear the night before or the day of the planned experience that is so sudden that it's really gives you pause. Like, what am I really doing? I felt fearful. I've thought about this. I've been scared. I've processed my fear, but this surge is overwhelming. So I think that's the reason why I included that in there, because again, if it's too much, if it's just too much, it's okay to surrender. It's okay to let go. It's okay to postpone. People need permission to say, you know what, it's going to happen. You've done all the preparation, you've done all the work. If it's not going to happen right now, it's still going to happen. Maybe this is a sign. The surge of fear is a sign, just like, let me take a step back. Let me talk to the facilitator. Can I put it off a few hours? Is it possible to put it off a day? What's Can I put it off a week? Like, how long do I think I might need? It doesn't have to be like, I've got to put it off. I've got to cancel this, and I don't know if I'm ever going to do it again. Not at all. Not at all. It's going to happen. I mean, especially when someone's done all the preparation, all the work that's involved. And so that's reassuring for people to know, hey, it's okay if I put it off. It doesn't mean I'm never going to do it. I will find a time to do it, and hopefully the person that I'm working with totally gets that and is completely on board.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to remind people that if that person that you're working with doesn't get that and isn't totally on board, you get to walk away from that relationship as well. Like, just because you've signed up for somebody does not mean you have to go through with it with that person. If at any point in time your facilitator makes you feel uncomfortable for any reason, you are not stuck in that situation. And that's another reason I firmly believe in like the full refund, because it can be the littlest things. I know that there was somebody who would send in feedback, and it was literally the practitioner had made one kind of offhanded comment, not knowing something that was a pretty basic medical fact, and that threw the patient for a total loop, and then just they lost their trust in the facilitator as a whole. And that's fair. And at that point, it should have been like, all right, I'm hitting the eject button. I'm done with this. And it should be okay, like there hopefully, that the facilitator has no ego involved. We know that that is not the case many times, but in an if your facilitator is giving you ego back, know that it is not about you. It is about them. Your healing is your business. And if you are not feeling comfortable, it is your business to walk on out. And so just know that you have that, not only that permission, but that is probably the best thing you can do for yourself, is to find yourself in a situation where the person does understand and does appreciate what you're going through, and wants to make sure that you're feeling your best or prepared in the way that is best prepared for that ceremony. Okay, last or second last on the list is, speaking of heavy energies, is like social or political unrest.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, we know that there are, I mean, God, given what's going on right now in the Ukraine is horrifying. Think of other things that happen in the news or politically all the time that we're bombarded by, some of which are way more significant than others. Obviously, there's ugly, difficult shit happening all the time, traumatic stuff happening all around the world all the time. But there are times we know collectively, as a society, as a global society, as a human species, there are things that are super upsetting. I mean, I can just list off so many. COVID is something we're all kind of burned out on at this point. Maybe won't use that example, but going back to, for example, racial trauma, when George Floyd and all these events that happen, it's like so deeply upsetting, really questioning our own humanity and what are we doing as a species? How are we treating each other? It's on everybody's mind. As a clinician who sees people day to day, there are events politically or culturally that rise to the level where more often than not, most patients are coming in, and at some point during the session, they will make a reference to whatever that thing is politically or culturally that's going on. And that's what I meant by this particular topic. If we happen to be, as a society, globally or locally, in a situation like that that's super upsetting, hell no, like just take a step back. This is maybe not the best time to go forward with this planned journey, because this thing that was really traumatic to our community or to our world is upsetting a lot of people right now. We're all not going to be in a great space. So that's really what I that's why I wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did. And I think sometimes we don't feel we have permission to let things like that admit that they affect us. Oh, I'm going to cancel because there's war in Ukraine. That sounds ridiculous. No, I love that you point out it's not ridiculous. It's coming up in so many people's, what they're reporting. Like, this is a global phenomenon. Everybody's experiencing. Same thing with, especially, when we had lockdown, or like you put examples like 9/11 or the January 6th. Capitol riots. Like, all of those things are legitimate reasons for you to be feeling this heavy energy that may stir up enough things. And like I said before, there's kind of two aspects. Is like, you want to get the most out of the journey as possible, and if you're so bogged down with certain energies that may not, are you going to spend the whole time, your whole ketamine session, thinking about Ukraine instead of what you were really going there to address? Like, what is the the ideal scenario for your mental state to be in, to go in? It's totally fine to say, like, right now this is occupying too much of my mental state and I don't think I'm going to get the most out of this journey. And it's okay. Again, there should be no judgment from whoever's facilitating you in any way. So by the way, I'm just loving this discussion, Rick. I'm so happy you wrote this article, because I think a lot of, I don't know how often it is that people feel like, oh my gosh, I've signed up for this thing and I have to go. But I'm just hoping that if at least one person feels the permission to say, nope, not today, then this episode has been worth it. Wrapping up, we have one last thing on the list. So if you could talk a little bit about the issue of when a death arises.
So death, that was the last one on the list for the article. Death, like, I mean, it's so interesting. It's such a I am fascinated by death. I think death is part of life. Death is, existentially, it's very important. When it's when somebody passes away, a pet dies, a loved one dies, someone that's fairly close to you dies. When you actually have that experience, I've had that experience. Many of us have had that experience. It's pretty it's pretty different than just hypothetically thinking about death and meditating on death and wondering about death and being fascinated by, how joyful life is because death exists, and the two are in harmony paradoxically, and all this beautiful stuff that we think about death. And even in the psychedelic world, I had a seminar with Chris Beisch. Have you had Chris Beisch on your show?
I have not.
Oh my gosh, you got to have Chris Beisch on your show. He wrote LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven. And it's really, really good. He's a retired philosophy professor, and he had like 20 years of high dose LSD journeys throughout his teaching career. And he wrote this book about taking 600 mics of LSD 73 times over the course of 20 years. And he documented the whole thing. And one thing that he said that stuck out. I mean, it's just a fascinating story. One thing that he said that stuck out was, each time he went into one of these high dose LSD experiences, he said to himself, "Is today a good day to die?" When you go into a psychedelic journey, asking yourself, "Am I okay with just dissolving into nothingness, because my entire understanding of anything that I understand in the world about myself is going to completely disappear, and in effect, I'm going to die. I'm going to die to all my ego, my anything that I understand in the world." So, there is this idea of death that's embedded within the psychedelic culture. Even, the meditation, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, doing death meditations. But if someone has died, an animal has died, a father, a mother has died, a child has died, a close aunt or uncle has died, a best friend has committed suicide. I mean, these are things that just rock our worlds. And usually we grieve, right? There's a healthy grieving process. So, maybe after, and I don't want to shortchange anything, like maybe after 2 or 3 weeks, you might be feeling like, okay, this death was sort of expected, sort of wasn't, or I think I'm feeling a little bit better. It could be 2 months, it could be 6 months, but chances are we all sort of recognize that death is part of life, and we might adjust somehow to that loss, and then we can resume our planned psychedelic journey. But I think if it's happening right around that time, it's really, death is, it does, it's like one of the top most stressful things that we go through as humans. And so if we're about to trip our faces off like the next day after somebody dies, it's just not, you know what I mean? Like, I don't mean to say that as if it's a recreational thing, but if we're gonna take a significant dose of these molecules, it just, that can really be, I think that's a setup for a pretty difficult journey that is just not necessary.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like that phrase, difficult journey that is not necessary. We're not saying that difficult journeys are bad or unwanted, but sometimes not necessary. If we can be mindful of the, like you said, these number of things that can perhaps tell us it's time to press pause on this journey and take it up later. Like you said, not pressing stop, not a cancellation, perhaps just a rescheduling, and maybe a rescheduling for a different practitioner, or maybe you decide with your practitioner maybe a different medicine. It depends on what has led to you making this decision, but until you take actually consume that medicine, you have the wherewithal and the ability, and it is suggested that if things are not feeling right for whatever reason, please have those discussions. I thoroughly have enjoyed this conversation, Rick. And again, like, did anybody bring up anything in the LinkedIn comments that they thought should be added to the article, that were other suggestions of conditions that may lead somebody to rethink a journey?
There was a lot of appreciation for putting it out there, and I think that people believe that, just like you do, that it's really important to make this sort of a known thing, so people are aware that it's okay to postpone for a while. So I don't think there are other things.
That's totally fine. I didn't know
Um,
if anything had stood out that somebody had said, like, oh, yeah, you definitely should add this thing. Because I think that most things fall into one of the categories you mentioned. Essentially, is there something that's weighing on you in a way that is out of the usual? Do you have something physically an ailment weighing on you? Is there a interpersonal conflict that is weighing on you? Your own emotional conflicts that may be coming up, or a death or political, something that is weighing on you in a way that isn't usually, and that, like you said, may lead this to be an unnecessarily difficult journey, then maybe it's time to stop and reconsider. Thank you so much for coming on, Rick. Can you tell people where to find you and the Psychedelic Society of Vermont?
Yeah, you can go to vermontpsychedelic.org. That's where we founded the Psychedelic Society of Vermont in last June, and we're putting on this fantastic conference in June in Stowe, Vermont, with some pretty cool people. Maybe Lynn Marie and the Psychedelic Medicine Association would like to be a part of it, but we'll talk offline about that.
I like this. This is the first I'm hearing of this.
Okay, yeah, it's really cool. I'll send you the link. And also, I'm very active on social media. I love putting stuff out there, not necessarily because I just love posting and I'm addicted to it, but even though I am addicted to it, I put it out there because, like it's one thing to work one-on-one with people and to be helpful in that way, but having a platform to try to share a good message, to contribute something of value to more people, is totally motivates me to put little posts on social media, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and really, meeting people like you and networking with so many people. It's hard to do, in other ways. So I like to be active there. So LinkedIn, Dr. Rick Barnett on LinkedIn, and on Twitter, it's the same thing, at DRRIICK, Dr. Rick Barnett on Twitter. Those are the two places where I'm most active.
Awesome. We will put links to those in the show notes. I'm going to personally endorse following you in all those places because I do, and I have learned a lot, including it spawning this episode, because I thought this is just a genius. And this is just something you popped, this article you just sat down and just threw out in, I don't know, the space of 10 minutes or whatever it took you. So if that gives you any idea of what kind of fantastic things Rick puts out, head on over and follow him. And I hope to see you and everybody else at this event you're having in Stowe, Vermont. Sounds fantastic. Can't wait to hear more. So thank you again, Rick, for coming on and sharing with us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you so much for doing what you do. Your podcast is phenomenal. It's one of the top psychedelic podcasts out there. And if anybody is not aware of that, definitely check out the other episodes. I love listening to all the different guests you have on. It's really fantastic.
You are too kind. I did not pay Rick to say any of that. Thank you very much. You're very sweet. All right. For everyone else out there, until next time. Thanks so much for listening to the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a rating or review as it helps others find the show. And if you'd like to learn more, you can find the show notes at plantmedicine.org/podcast, and there's information for clinicians at psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. Our incredible music was by the one and only Porangi. We'll see you next time.